Hi, have you ever wondered how far can you get into the game with just a Honda NSX? Are you curious on how well can the NSX handle Gran Turismo? Do you have time to spare today? No? That's a lie! After all, you're here! Today, we are giving Gran Turismo 4 a visit with just NSX. For this one, I am only allowed to use all kinds of NSX. A regular NSX? Go right ahead. A NSXR? Please do. Even a JGTC NSX is legal in this run. As long as the car is the NSX, I am allowed to use it to race and progress deeper into the game. Hold up. What is this? That is also a NSX. Eh? What kind of NSX is this? That's the second generation of NSX, made in 2015. 2015? But this game was published in 2004. You don't exist yet. Get out of here. Alright, with that had been said, into the world of Gran Turismo, we go. Upon starting your career, you are given 10 grand credits to start out. Unfortunately, this much money was nowhere enough to buy any kind of NSX. The cheapest one is at least 28 grand after all. From the looks of it, starting the game with an NSX seems impossible, until you take in the fact that you can transfer money from your Gran Turismo 3 save file up to 100k. And as for me, I was fortunate enough to have this exact thing. Well, that is something. This should be enough to start out. But before I go buy myself a NSX, I would have to get my driver licenses first. As part of transferring the save file, the game allows me to skip National B and A, leaving me with only International B and International A instead. With a bit of elbow grease, I managed to score silver on both licenses and was awarded with a couple of useless concept cars and a Nismo 270R. This car then was used to further my funds to start my career in the NSX. I looked and looked. While there was an NSX that I could buy, there's a personal problem with that car. It was not blue. Trivial maybe, but I would like it if I could start my career in a blue NSX. And so, I waited and waited, week after week, but none turned up. Well, none that I could afford anyway. So, I decided to get one from a known associate. Look, I have to pay 45 grand for something I could easily get for 28 grand. From a financial standpoint, I'm shooting myself in the leg here. Plus, this NSX is bone stock. I see no problem in paying a premium to get the NSX in the color that I want. Now, with a car in hand and a complete set of licenses, it was prime time to get racing. The first set of events I would go for would be the Sunday Cup. Practically zero restrictions on entrance, the NSX is a shoe-in to the event. Only, I might have made it too easy for me. Compared to these daily drivers, the NSX is a complete menace on the streets. By simply launching, I have managed to overtake the Alfa Romeo. The Polo ahead of me did not last long either, as my NSX made my way to P4 in a rather clean, swift motion. What about the XP, you might ask? Well, what about him? Forgotten like a footnote. Even with terrible, expired, no-good oil, I was still making substantial progress down the race. This, of course, was to be expected. My car was simply far too fast and too agile for these daily drivers to ever hope to catch. Speaking of, the black Fiat was finally overtaking after a short session of tailgating, with little to no effort at all. First place was mine. I might have gone too wide on that corner to my liking, but given my opposition, I could care less. I could have driven like an absolute baboon and still win. By the final lap, I have created a glaring gap of 6 seconds against the rest of the pack, and that was it. The very first win in the NSX gained in the run. Before I continue racing, I ensured myself to reward the NSX with a dose of delicious, fresh, high-grade oil as a nice gesture to this fine piece of automobile. After that, it was time for round 2 set in the beginner's course. Oh look, a Miata probably could give me an actual challenge. Just kidding, off he goes to absolute obscurity. The Scion followed suit, and while I did get into a bit of jam behind the MGF, I bid my time, quickly planned my route, and made my move on the chicane, where I had finally clawed my way up to the podium. The black Fiat thought it was smart of him to take the inner lane. Little did he know, I had another trick up my sleeve and go even deeper down the corner. And just like that, P1 was at hand. Like before, this race was a complete breeze, and I managed to cross the finish line when they barely left the chicane. After a few more easily won races, I was faced with my first prize car of the run, the Auto Bianchi Abarth, which is completely irrelevant to the run. The Sunday Cup was done. Next up, the MR Challenge, as the NSX is a middle-engined, rear-wheel drive car. This challenge is the only drivetrain-related challenge the NSX could enter, as the event was filled with cars of my stock NSX level, such as other NSXs. I was hoping for a decent challenge down this event. Whether these racers would meet my expectations, we shall find out here in the beginner's course. I politely shoved the MR2 aside, gaining P5. The Garaya didn't stand much chance against the NSX either. Around the chicane, I noticed a rather familiar yellow NSX. I tried to attack him from the inside down the final corner, which proved to be a good idea, as I managed to snatch a place in the podium away from him. On lap 2, I decided to dive bomb the Lotus, thinking of seizing the chance for silver medal early. Unfortunately, this proved to be a failure, as the Esprit was able to cruise back to P2. On the chicane though, I used a rather unique racing line to retake my spot from the Lotus, and from that point on, the hunt for the Type S0 was on. My efforts on this hunt proved to be effective. Too effective, as I had closed the gap between us in a very short time. As I made my way through, I figured that I can easily hit the gas and leave this sorry excuse of a NSX behind. But that would be kinda boring, wouldn't it? So, I did this. Alright, it is time to do the funny. Come on. Be funny, be funny, be funny. Funny level achieved. And he's making a pit stop. Brilliant. Oh, this is too great. And just like that, the first race of the MR Challenge was at hand. I couldn't overlap the poor NSX, but regardless, I won. The next race that was set in the autumn ring? Well, let us see. The NSX made its way through the purple MR2. The Lotus was lucky I was unable to reach him on the corner, but nevertheless, this was just delaying the inevitable. I tailed to Elise throughout the brief straights and took advantage of the black convertible's lack of optimization, reaching P4 right around the corner. On the 8th corner, I started to make my way through by taking over the Type R's post. Then, after a little skirmish with yet another NSX, P2 was at hand. That's an Esprit in front of a pack of NSXs. This was simply unacceptable. So, in one swift movement, I overtook the Esprit and claimed the pole position all for myself. On the long straights, I have noticed the butting distance I had started to build between me and my rivals. Looks like they won't be much of a problem either. Seriously, is there anyone here that can provide me with a decent challenge? I went past on the first checkpoint, curiously awaiting the rest to cross that line. Just after I entered this banked turn, the interface showed that I had quite a solid lead over the Esprit and the others. This gap kept on increasing as I have went past the second checkpoint. On one hand, I figured that as part of the beginner's league, maybe the game lowered the difficulty to not gate the game from absolute beginners from racing. But on the other hand, this level of difficulty is quite lackluster. This is a stock NSX, and assuming the other racers were also on sports medium, they should have been swarming all over me, given how similar our cars were supposed to be in terms of performance. Well, it is what it is. That was the second race of the MR Challenge, won quite easily in my opinion. The third race was set in a rather challenging layout with lots and lots of narrow, sharp corners. New York. Maybe this time, I'll get the challenge that I was looking for. Upon entering the roundabout, a rather unfortunate Garaya made the mistake of being in the wrong place and wrong time. And as a consequence, the small blue car was cushioned between my NSX and the other NSX. This though, did not stop me from taking P5 early, and shortly after, the other NSX was taken care of with pure speed and bravado. I had the power advantage, and so I overtook the Opel through sheer power instead. However, the remaining two opponents weren't going to be so easily taken down. On these straights, they actually managed to keep their distance from my blue NSX. While some might think I have overshot this corner here, it was indeed part of my plan. As the Esprit took the typical racing line, I went deep so I could position my car better on the next corner. The deep was already done. P2 in hand and a meek Clio was all that was between me and my victory. I carefully navigated through the series of sharp, unforgiving turns down this concrete jungle, and once the Clio made a small slip, I took my chances and wrestled to win away from the red hatchback. While P1 was claimed rather easily this time around, and that was good for my run, I could feel a tinge of disappointment, especially on these straights where they just could not keep up with me and my NSX. Upon entering the second lap, the gap became hideously large, as proven by the interface which informed me of my 3 seconds of advantage against the rest. This gap then became even more disgustingly large by the first checkpoint. What was once excitement from thinking I have met worthy foes became disappointment and indifference as the Clio crossed the checkpoint 6 seconds later from me. Which the NSX managed to outperform the cars in both cornering and speed, I've managed to claim yet another victory in this event. The third race was set in Fuji Speedway. On the straights, I made quick work of several rivals, landing me almost immediately on P3. You'd think the Elise would put up more of a fight, but no, he went down almost as fast as the rest. Sure, the MR2 tried making a comeback on turn 1, but it was all for naught. I have managed to solidify my lead. The second I left the hairpin, the gap was building. After a proper throttle control down to 100R, I set my sights on the hairpin, in where I braked just in time to avoid the car going out of my premeditated route. This kind of driving, combined with the sheer performance my NSX has allowed me to speed across the Panasonic curve way ahead of my rivals. Looks like there has been a change of leadership in the rest of the pack, as the yellow NSX entered the final laps 6 seconds later compared to the blue NSX. While P2 and P3 had created a significant rift between them and the rest, that was still nowhere enough to catch up to me and my beautiful NSX. In the end, I have managed to claim yet another victory. Now this might be an interesting one. El Capitan, a layout filled with unstable curves, with dangerous uphills and treacherous downhills. Surely, this will give me the adrenaline that I seek. Upon launching, the Garaya was done for, as well as the Elise. Through a rather risky line, I took on the silver NSX, and right after the first hairpin, the red MR2 has officially lost its crown. Well, there goes the other racers. Let's focus on driving throughout the nature instead. On the uphill part, the car's rear tires suddenly lost their grip, probably as a result for this rather steep change in elevation. I countered this issue through precisely controlling my throttle down the track. On turn 9, once again, the gap had already been massive. By the second checkpoint, I have been leading by at least 5 seconds, and from previous experience, should I keep my pace, not fall into Dunning-Kruger-induced tendencies, and remain within the limits of the track, this gap would only increase. And increase it did, as I was already lagged into the second and final lap. The fastest of my rivals had just entered the second lap 7 seconds later than me. This time, I went as close as possible down the second and the most sharp hairpin this layout has to offer. Not that I needed to try that hard anymore here, but I thought it would be cool. Long after I passed the second checkpoint, the rest of the grid arrived. Looks like El Capitan race was proven to be easy. Winning the MR challenge had given me the pleasure of getting my hands on the Lotus Esprit. Once again, as it was not an NSX, I had to decline this generous gift. And let's see what's next. We established that the NSX cannot enter any other drivetrain related events, nor can it race Mini Coopers in the K-Car Cup. Spiders and Roadster, the NSX is not an open top, so that's also a no-go. And it clearly is no truck. With no more events eligible for my NSX in the Beginners League, looks like my time in a small pond had come to an end, and my time on the bigger pond has begun. For the first event I'll tackle on the Professional League, I had chosen the Clubman Cup as it was the easiest event the Professional League can offer, which my NSX can actually take part in. The first race was set in Apricot Hill Raceway, with promise point almost reaching 100. I was expecting a decent challenge. Upon launching, I had to rely on slipstreaming to catch the crowd. Like before, I managed to sweep a bunch of cars rather early, landing me on P4. Unfortunately, the yellow Audi and the BMW made it quite impossible for me to launch an attack. For now. Combine that and their seemingly equal performance, I was excited at the prospect of challenge this event would bring. I saw a gap between the two European cars, and what kind of racer would I be if I didn't go for it? The BMW was kicked off the podium, and I took a deep lane to outdrive the Audi, which had proven to be the correct move, as it had landed me on P2. Now, while most of the grid were rather easy pickings, there was a special case among them, the Elise. For some reason, the Elise in Clubman Cup is simply faster. Even too fast for the Clubman Cup, I'll argue. I was completely outdone on both the straights and the corners, as if a speed demon had possessed whoever's driving that Elise. After I figured that no form of driving would allow me to win against the Super Elise, I rolled over to the tuning shop and gave the NSX the set of soft sports it deserves. And then, back to the grind I gone. This time though, there were no Elise to be seen. While a bit disappointed, I decided to roll with it. Right off the bat, I reached P4 with absolute ease. The Eclipse might have a distinctive blue on it, but still, there was not enough to prevent me from reaching the podium. Through proper choice in lanes, I managed my way past the silver hatchback, and soon, the Fiat Coupe was out of the picture before the second corner. While I've managed to get a win with little to no issue, the difficulty the Clubman Cup has without the Elise is not up there to say the least. By the second lap, I have managed to smoke the rest of the grid, despite the seemingly strong performance from the 190E. On the final lap, the distance was double. At this point, I'll just use this time to get used to the soft spots, should I meet that Elise again in the future. The notion of being careful did not completely lose me, as I made my way down the wide 7th corner to ensure the car remained as close as possible to the curbs. On the hairpin, I kept the car down the ideal lane, ensured a disciplined turn of control to ensure the car hit the apex point of the corner. Well, looks like that was it. First place in the first race of the first event in the professional league. The second race was set in the east course of Twin Ring Motegi. Once again, no Elise was found. I wonder if my readiness scared him off. Regardless, as I was starting from dead last in a rolling start, I was left behind for a little. It was not until the second turn I was able to get back to the pack. On the third turn, I noticed the focus widened out. I saw this as a chance for an overtake and went close to the curbs. For you see, this tactic allowed me to take on the 4th corner faster, which resulted in a swift overtake against the Ford. I tailgated the red Alpha and through sheer power, slingshot my way towards 4th place. I tried to overtake the FC before turn 8, however, the FC proved to be equal in power to my NSX, so I had to be clever about this. Apparently, a little switchback was all that was needed to finally take the FC. While I was dealing with the Clio, I noticed that the guy in first was starting to make a gap. That was not good. It was high time to get rid of this hatchback and deal with the FD on front. I braked late, overtook the Clio right before the hairpin, and from then on, it was time for the hunt against the Mazda. While on the straights I seemed to be outmatched, the same could not be said on the corners. By the first corner of the second lap, I was starting to pull on the FD. Before the third corner, I was practically right behind him. On the 5th corner, I felt I have entered the FD's slipstreaming range. On the straights, I did not waste any time to take advantage of the reduced wind resistance and pulled myself even closer. At the 6th corner, I have finally managed to outdo the FD and claim P1. On the final straight section of the lap, the table had been completely turned, with me gapping the FD by 3 seconds. As long as I don't do anything profoundly stupid, this race is pretty much in the bag. And looks like I managed to not do anything dumb this time, as I was able to reach the finish line way before anyone else in the race. The next race was set in Seoul Central, and would you look at that, the Elise is back. It was prime time for revenge. Like usual, the 4 racers on the grid were easy pickings. That Elise, however, was not. While this was the challenge that I was looking for, the Elise perhaps has proven to be too much. However, I have bought the soft spots already. No way I'm letting such an opportunity slide. I will beat that cheating Elise no matter what, which didn't seem to work. So, I gave the NSX even more upgrades. Even after these upgrades, I cannot just waltz in and do whatever I want, as the Elise had proven to be unstoppable. If I were to win, I'll have to preserve, be resilient, and keep my cool, even if I had to try again. Elise! I will not let such abject failures to get in my way of beating this Elise. Look, the objective of the run is still knowing how far can you get in the game with only NSXs, but beating this Elise has now become my personal goal. No matter what, I'll see this Elise beaten and humiliated no matter what. Around the first corner, I copied the FC to benefit from the slipstream, and right before the second corner, the FC was taken care of. I made quick work of both the Skyline and the FD, as well as the Celica, which had landed me on P2. Real fight then was to take on the Elise once and for all. That Elise might have a different color, but it still has the same demonic position as all Elise do in the Clubman Cup. Upon reaching the second checkpoint, it was revealed that I was 2 seconds behind. However, I didn't stop trying, especially after I realized that my NSX was still superior in cornering as was shown on the roundabout. Okay, the gap might have just grown bigger as we entered the second lap, but that was because the section leading to the finish line was a long straight, the perfect playground for the unnaturally fast Elise. If you think I'll let this discourage me, then you, my friend, are simply mistaken. I carefully made my way past the second turn, getting as close as possible to the walls, without actually grazing them for the optimal racing line. As I hold the advantage on the corners, I must use all of that without fail if I were to have a shot against this Elise. By the first checkpoint, I've noticed that the gap was slowly closing. By the second checkpoint, the gap had been significantly reduced to below 2 seconds. Should I keep this up, even the mighty Elise would be toppled. I remained cautious down the roundabout, balancing both speed and control, and by the third lap, the Elise could only regain so much footing as I've become closer and closer with each corner. Like before, I took on the second turn with a prioritization of proper positioning over speed to avoid making mistakes that will dash off any hope of victory that I have. Chase down the Elise down the straights and properly identified the apexes of both turn 5 and turn 6. This excellence had brought me onto the Elise's slipstreaming range, which translates into my attacking range. With reduced wind resistance that was coming from the Elise itself, I now have enough speed to contest the red car on its home turf. Unfortunately, with an overly relieving occasion of finally overtaking this cheaty Elise, I forgot to see the bigger picture within the race. Me, already being tired with this conniving Lotus, decided to take some revenge into my own hands. Some might think what I have done was unfair, but hey, if you wanna talk about unfair, how about talking about the guy who brought a maxed out Elise in a cup where everyone's bringing pretty much stock cars? Regardless of that, on the final lap, my objective was to no longer hunt, but rather to defend. To do this, a precise, fast, yet careful driving must be done. On the second turn, while I was starting to show signs of fear, I remembered to take the proper lane, which allowed me to curve along with little to no hitch. On the fifth corner, I ensured that my racing line was honored and well kept. All this hard work began to show by the second checkpoint, where I have managed to create at least an entire second of lead from the Elise. With the Elise breathing on my neck less, I could loosen up the tension and properly took care of the roundabout. Along the final straight, I was prepared to have the Elise to do one final attempt to reclaim victory. But fortunately for me, that moment never came. My NSX was simply too fast and too far for the Elise to attempt a last stand. Finally, victory over the third race of the series, and more importantly, a win against this Elise had been achieved. Still don't believe me something's weird with that guy's Elise? Check that leaderboard out. I'll read it out for you even. See? The rest of the grid couldn't even make it to the finish line in time. That's how different that Elise was from the rest of the typical Clubman Cup difficulty. Winning the Clubman Cup gave me a Mazda 6, which in my opinion is whatever. Regardless, that is no NSX and therefore has no use on this run. The next series I could take on in this league was the race of NA Sports. As there is no way in Gran Turismo 4 you can install a turbocharger onto your NSX, this is a perfect candidate for the event. The first race was set in the Infineon Raceway, and it promises 137 A-Spec points, quite a record for the run. Let us see how this one goes. The Audi made quite the mistake by choosing that racing line. I responded by going deep on the corner and take the red Audi from the inside, and just like that, P5 was at hand. I tailed the black Pima, and after convincing the German vehicle to move out of my way, I attempted an overtake. But looks like the M3 had other plans. We were entangled on a short duel before I could finally climb yet another position. The Z33 braked too early for the turn, which gave me all that I needed to finally make my way to the podium. As I made my way past the rather sharp corner, I saw the TVR making quite a blunder. Top that with a rather unsafe re-entry he's making, and I saw a chance to swiftly end their defiance. I carefully navigated down the wavy corners until I finally saw an opening and went for it. With little to no resistance, I managed to squeeze my way to victory. However, that was no time to rest, as the TVR still has enough power to keep up. I defended my post down turn 9, and admittedly brought too much speed on the 10th corner. It was my luck that the NSX could regain grip right before it touches sand. On the brighter side, guess that helped me in warming up my tires. On the hairpin, I ensured the car to be as close as possible to the track's limits, as I figured the TVR would take the similar lane. And thanks to these efforts, I managed to enter lap 2, a second before the Tamora. Just like that, victory was secured. By the last lap's third checkpoint, I was already 3 seconds ahead. The slight mess up could have worsened things, but it was not enough to take victory away from me. Another remarkable race was set in the twin-ring Motegi, 143 points. While promising, I figured it would be yet another walk in the park. However, the Corvette and the 350Z might have different ideas. Right after the first turn, I could already see them gapping the rest of the grid with relative ease. This set off quite the alarm in my head, which alerted me to dispose of the rest of the opposition and get to it. By the third corner, I took on the other NSX. I kept the Audi in front from going too far in front through pure speed, and took advantage of the saloon's poor braking to crawl up to P4. On turn 7, I noticed that I was getting close towards the Tamora, and so, to not let this chance go, I ensured a careful drive down turn 8. After the hairpin, I was certain that the distance between me and the TVR had become closer. I was planning to pull myself up with a slipstream, but looks like the NSX's deficit in power had begun to show. This though was not worrying, as the TVR couldn't keep that up down the 11th corner. Just like with the Clubman Elise, with each corner, I became closer to victory. The TVR's time on the P3 was finally over, as I finally managed to wrestle that position away. Now, the hunt for the win could actually begin. As I sped down the straights, I prepared myself to take on the sharp right awaiting at the end of this section. While I stayed true to my lane down this corner, the Z happened to falter and gave up its silver medal. First corner of the final lap, I managed to stay within the Grand Sport's slipstreaming range, which allowed me to prevent the Corvette from taking off on the straights. By the second corner, I started my attack. While it didn't seem to work, the attack had positioned me better and allowed me to claim victory on the third corner instead. Swiftly, yet carefully, I went down the 7th corner and used the brief straight to position my car so I could handle the next corner from an ideal position. This time, I braked in time to follow a rather textbook racing line down the 9th corner, and looks like I succeeded in being optimal this time, as a noticeable distance was starting to form between me and my rivals. However, the long straights bridging the hairpin to the 11th corner might be their last chance to attack. Or not. Looks like the second I got a solid lead in this race, they just sort of give up. After dealing with the last set of corners, I hit the hammer, and with little to no resistance, I have finally claimed another win in the series. Winning the race of NA Sports had awarded me with a NSXR Concept, the only NSX you will ever get as a prize car, in the professional league at least. Of course, this beautiful gem welcome in my garage. Now, after the NA series was taken care of, there was one more series I could take on with an NSX, the Tuning Car Cup. Filled with tuned cars mostly sourced from a tuning village, I'll expect strong resistance, even too strong for my current condition. So, I set my sights for a set of races in where the entry requirements are loose, the special conditions. Filled with tight tracks and an actual off-road action, the only thing barring you from entering some of these events would be dirt and snow tires. Other than that, most cars can take part in these events, including my freshly won NSXR. So far, winning these races didn't seem to be much of a challenge, and the financial reward from completing these challenges are indeed substantial, especially from selling that RSC Rally Raid car. With that amount of money, I immediately made another purchase. Say hello to, you guessed it, another NSX. But this is no normal NSX, no. It is the finalized production version of the NSXR. I can actually color this particular NSXR in blue, which might or might not be the only reason on why I've bought the car. So far, my journey in the special conditions were good. I wonder what challenge had awaited me next. Oh no. Grand Canyon? I shuddered at the thought of bringing a middle-engined, rear-wheel drive car onto any other surfaces other than the glorious asphalt. And I'm pretty certain that doing otherwise is simply an act of the deranged. But the car can technically enter this event. Just bite your tires and you're set. So, I have to try and win this, right? Right? While debating this insane idea in my head, I remembered that a seasoned Gran Turismo content creator, Tikanji, had published a rally tune for the NSXR on YouTube. Go check his video out, it's awesome. The build was for the blue NSXR that I just bought, but I figured they're the one and the same with little differences, so I got the concept car, some upgrades, a wing for the downforce, and set the car almost exactly like Tikanji did with his NSXR. Well then, it was time to test this build out. Would you look at that? The NSX is actually controllable on dirt. Not bad. Sure, the fact that I haven't ran circles around the Celica is concerning, but at very least, this run is shaping better than I have thought. I figured that I'll keep the car on the first gear given the complex layout of the track. That and the fact that whenever I get to the second gear, I'll have to shift down almost immediately. The only exception will be this section with some jumps on it. Through this experience, I can tell for sure that throttle control is king on the dirt, especially on a car that was never supposed to be on here. Naturally, this race would prove to be an easy win. The same could also be said to the ice rallies, especially in Chamonix, where I can just outpower the snow-spec enemies on the asphalt section. My run off-road was smooth, for the easy and normal difficulties at least, for the storm was still at bay. Special conditions, hard mode.
Hey you!
Me?
Yeah, look, the guys you're gonna go up against are no pushovers. You ain't meaning anything in that.
Everyone said that, yet my NSX had proven otherwise.
Because they're slow. Look, I got a set of magic tires here for 48 grand.
Damn, they do look racing great to me.
They are. Record time guaranteed.
You know what? Alright, I'm loaded anyway. Alright, first up, we got Gtafan. This time, instead of racing outdated compacts or tuners that are supposedly on the NSX level, I'm up against an authentic rally car. At first, I didn't think too much of it, but underestimating these rivals might just be a mistake. After the first corner, the Renault had started to make the run for it. On this downhill section, I braced myself and did what some might think outright insane, driving on full throttle down the alternating tight corners. Would you look at that? The magic tires did their magic. My NSX was faster than never before. I have to admit, this went on a bit too violent. While the hostile takeover might not sit too well with the car afterwards, I managed to catch it before it could spin out of control and return the lead to this unexpectedly ferocious foe. The blue rally car attempted an overtake, and this happened. While I got penalized for the Renault's mistake, I think the rally car ended up way worse. Due to the nature of this treacherous course, I couldn't exactly let loose the second the penalty was up either. Guess in the end, the penalty wasn't too damaging to my performance in the race. As I came out from the insanely tight road, I reacted to the red arrows in time, averting the car from a nasty crash. After all, stuff like that is only funny when it happens to my rivals. On the hairpin, the advantage I gained from the Renault being an absolute specimen of a Frenchman was obvious. 14 seconds. Let's see how he'll overturn this one. Upon leaving the hairpin, I put the hammer down and go for it, ensuring to maintain the lead I have throughout the 5 laps of this treacherous duel. Of course, I brake the second I see the red arrows on the wall. Thanks to the sets of racing grade brakes, the NSX was sufficiently slowed down on a dime. Upon entering the second lap, I was left with no choice but to go easy on the throttle as the altitude of this section was rather dangerous. Even with this level of caution, the NSX still slid about. It was a good thing I was able to keep the car from trading paint with the walls. Once that part was over though, it was time for absolute balls to the walls. I'll admit, the change of altitude once again messed up with the car's handling right after I left the hairpin, but I doubt that would be much of a problem going forward as I was still leading by a large margin. After the straight uphill section, I managed to brake without disruption this time around and managed to avoid a penalty and make a smooth proceeding down the set of twists and turns. Personally, I think it's neat of them to add a 2G-like mode to the game. One-on-one modes in tight mountainous roads with Gran Turismo physics? I honestly couldn't ask for more, but a penalty system could do some work. Because here, sometimes you won't be penalized for obviously grinding on your rival, but on some occasion, you will be penalized for making a pixel of contact with them, regardless on whose fault that is. Meanwhile, the opponent in question, they're pretty much immune to the blame, as if they're granted diplomacy immunity from FIA themselves. Regardless, penalties won't be a thing to be worried about this time, so long as I keep my head in the game and keep the car on this pace without making scratches on the walls. I made sure to enter the third lap with eyes peeled towards the gates, walls and what have you, and proceeded deeper into the race. On the earliest sector of the lap, I employed caution, yet I drove firmer as I have become confident with the layout. Once I felt the danger section was behind me, I hit the gas and drove to the gate like a madman. I went through the hairpin with sufficient throttle control, and while I might have made the turn too fast, I managed to slow the car down enough to not spin out of control. And would you look at that? The wall rebounded me to a better position and a proper speed to take on the chicane. Yes, you can say, that happy little accident turned out to be a huge blessing in disguise. Once I saw the climb had become steep, I braked in time, expecting sharp corners. This consistent performance had brought me even further from the Frenchman, which solidifies the win even more. Carefully, I assad along the corners until I see the directional arrows, signaling the end of the twisty and narrow, onto the wide and relatively straight. While the car widened out on the hairpin out of excessive speed, I managed to aim its nose once again in the proper direction. Another chicane, signaled by the red arrows, was here. I responded by properly braking and getting the car through a rather lean racing line for carrying all the momentum I could down the track. And right after that, it was a smooth yet narrow sailing towards the end of the lap. Other than me being an utter imbecile and randomly thinking that damaging this gate, which probably has significant historical value, was a good idea, I was striding and riding through the event to that sweet victory. And now, for the actual pain. Grand Canyon on hard. I kid you not, I was trying this race for at least 2 hours, still no dice. Even with Tikanji's tune, dueling an actual rally car in a NSX is hard. Stupid hard. At this absolute process of pain, anguish, and rage, I began to lose hope. I began to think that beating at least the Grand Canyon race in an NSX was simply impossible. I mean, the second I started the race, understandably, the rally car, which already was starting from the front, launches off far, too far for me to start slipstreaming. If, and only if, I even manage to catch up and attack. The penalty system is, honestly, a system of all time. That's all I can say while remaining civil. Truthfully, while I was devising an idea of a NSX only run, I was thinking of special conditions as a mere afterthought. Never in my wildest fantasies would I think that this is what would be my biggest roadblock in the entire run. For the off-road stages, I thought the rally tune would work like literal magic, turning an asphalt-oriented NSXR into an absolute, unstoppable machine on alternative surfaces with mere setting changes. But then, reality hit like a speeding truck in a school zone. Maybe it wasn't the tune's fault, since I frankly suck at tuning cars. Maybe I have applied the tune wrong somehow. Maybe the NSXR concept really was fundamentally different from the NSXR, and I should have used the blue one for this purpose instead. Maybe, instead of going for a stage 3 NA tune to preserve this car's sound, I should have followed Tikanji's tune to a T and go for racing exhausts instead. However, mentally, I still have strength, rapidly dwindling, but enough for a few more tries. Until that runs out, I will keep on trying. If it's possible, then I will, one way or another, achieve it. Upon starting, the Lancer once again launched off. Visibility be damned, this is the song and dance we have tangled in countless times. I made it to the first corner, holding the car on second gear so I could control its slide better. While the car seemingly was out of control for the third corner, no penalty was issued. I hammered the NSX down the sharp right, relied on the guardrails to steer my car, and overtook the rally car in one swift movement. That was it. Phase 1 was completed. Now, for the harder part. I got 5 laps, and one mistake would mean the Lancer returning to P1. That was not a thing I could exactly come back from. On the 10th corner, I could sense yet another attempt by the Lancer. I figured I would leave no room to attack by the hairpin if I drift. And looks like it worked. The Lancer was once again repelled. Right on the 13th corner, I remembered of the existence of the quicksand and remained in the middle to ensure optimal speeds down the treacherous curve. On the first checkpoint, I managed to clock almost an entire second of advantage from the rally car. I was thinking the long straights ahead would be a suitable place to finally gain some distance over the Lancer. I kept my lead by carefully going around the curve and thought to leave the Lancer in the dust. However, the jumps prevented the NSX from going all out and allowed the Lancer to keep its tabs on me throughout the section. Throughout an even smaller hairpin, I have to admit, keeping myself calm and serene was quite the challenge, but a challenge that I managed to overcome regardless. The corner after that though, I could see the Lancer showing its scary head on the screen once again. Lucky me, the rally car was pulled back by the quicksand. Upon noticing this, I adapted, pulled the NSX to the center, off from the quicksand, and cautiously make the turn. Before the second lap, there's a couple of hairpins left, and of course, I have to defend myself from the Lancer flawlessly regardless. Once again, I entrusted the second gear to act as a soft limiter to the NSX, which worked as intended and used the bumpless final section of the lap to finally dust the Lancer and give me some room to breathe. Well, barely a second of gap, but that was what I need. The Lancer might have caught up by the first corner, but at the very least, even for a moment, I could reduce the tension. I carefully went past the corner, knitting through the curve ever so slowly and steadily. After the third corner, I immediately hammered down to escape the ever-increasingly vicious rally car and continued leading down the fourth corner. After the run around a corner, I used the brief straights to try and get away from this menacing opponent. I even threw a sick drift down the small hairpin for good measure. Yet, looks like all it did was putting the rally art team's car washer into overtime from all the dirt I threw the Lancer's way. By sheer car performance, the Lancer has practically caught up by the first checkpoint. Yet another evidence of the sheer insanity of what we're trying to achieve here. At the end of the straights, I figured the Lancer would remain in the middle throughout the corners. Therefore, to defend myself, I did the same, by putting as much care and caution to my technique down this corner as I could. And on the second checkpoint, I have finally managed to push the Lancer back. The rally machine was about to make a comeback, but for some reason, this awkward mishap caused the car to just break. He had all the chance in the world to ruin my run then and there, but he just stopped. He might was trying to be careful, as I was doing something rather wacky on the curve. Or he might was just looking at me with pity and mockery for trying to win against that in an NSX on Grand Canyon out of all places. Regardless of the reason, this is one mistake I will make sure he lived down the rest of his dirt-addicted life. I sped down the last section of the layout for the lap until lap 3, and this time, things got a bit grim as I wasn't even a second away from the Lancer. No matter what, the fort will be defended. On turn 7, for a moment, things got dicey, which prompted me to go on the inside lane down the next corner as I predicted the Lancer would do the same, preventing him from making an overtake. After the hairpin, looks like the Lancer was unoptimal. I managed to make a brief distance, an advantage I will have to keep and use to defend this hard-earned victory. By this lap's first checkpoint, I could almost leave this Lancer by a full second behind, but compared to the previous lap, I have to say this is progress. This time, before the jumpy straights, I managed to optimize my approach on the corner and managed to drive around it without extreme drifting, which could have taken a very much needed speed away, as well as positioning the car better to take on the deceptively dangerous section. Of course, the Lancer could keep up and almost make a move, as at the end of this section, I'd gotten more drift angle than I would have liked as a result of excessive speed upon entering the corner. On the corner before the couple of last hairpins, I managed to make it through safely and soundly, and more importantly, optimally. For a moment, I could finally leave the Lancer in the dust. Sure, like before, the car bounded back on the hairpin, but on a situation as tight as these, I doubt he could make that overtake. On the 4th lap, I have gotten more than a second of lead against the rally car, a fruit of my hard work in ensuring the rally car never get to taste victory ever again. The Lancer hunted me down the second corner. At this point, I believe this is just how the race was supposed to be. This was just the natural order of the race. However, as long as I could keep myself on top, this is not something I have any problems with. On the 10th corner, my heart made a bit of a leap as I made quite the error of inviting myself to the quicksand. The NSX got too slow for my liking, and I was preparing for a takeover attempt. But that didn't come. I took what I could get and continued racing, burying this little incident behind. Before the jumpy straights, the Lancer tried to attempt yet another murder. Yet again, I was nowhere fast for this pathetic yet sacrilegious act to bear any fruit. I remained in front while the Lancer remained eating dirt from my tires. On the second corner after the straights, I did feel like a badass after blocking the Lancer's attempt at overtaking by drifting. In my opinion, that moment alone went pretty hard. Our struggle continued as we went past the final hairpin of the lap. From how close we were to each other upon entering the final lap, it was safe to say that the Lancer thought that enough was enough. I thought the same, and it truly was time to put this rivalry onto its bed. On the 12th corner, I once again denied the Lancer the win by throwing a sick drift on the right moment at the right time. On the hairpin afterwards, I kept to myself as the Lancer missed the memo and dove straight to the rails. After the long straights, I kept the NSX under control and minimized the drifts across the corner, maintaining all the momentum I could keep to keep my lead. The Lancer's final chance to rob this victory was on the final hairpins, on which I ensured the NSX made zero contact with the guardrails and remained in the middle, closing off all likely doors the rally driver would use to thwart my plans. I kept myself focused to handle the last set of corners, keeping both the car's position and speed levels proper, all to ensure this Lancer stays down for good. This is where I will finally take my victory. This is where Strix won Gran Turismo 4's Grand Canyon Rally in a very unlikely car. Finally, I can put the Grand Canyon to rest. It is safe to say that until I have somehow completely forgotten about this insanity, I do not wish to tread upon Grand Canyon with an NSX ever again. Exhausted from the countless try and errors, I didn't even feel a pint of happiness on the screen, unreal relief from the fact that I had done it. I have beaten what could be dubbed as Gran Turismo 4's hardest rallying experience in an NSX. Next, we got Ice Arena, small and filled to the brim with ice. Once again, I braced myself to yet another face-off against a rally car in its home territory. And of course, it's yet another Lancer. Well, could have been worse. Anyways, on Ice Arena, I noticed something. The corners are not very sharp, meaning I could have used some creativity. The incessant amount of time I've spent to try and error this mode had given me a fair idea on how hard can you bang the walls before they penalize you. With this carnal knowledge, I started being creative by the third corner. I was tempted to be creative on the next corner as well, but I remembered that this turn was connected to the other alternating curves, and so I held myself from going overboard and properly take the turn. Despite the sheer disadvantage I was facing, I kept on pushing, banking it all on the final corner of the lap to go absolutely creative. And when absolutely creative I did, While the Lancer was toiling, taking a corner normally, I flew around the corner, cutting the distance between me and the Evo practically by half. However, the fight was not over. In fact, it had just gotten started. The chicane did prevent me from going creative mode, but being creative didn't mean I couldn't take corners on the snow properly. On turn 3, I stuck to the honorable way of racing and remained close to the inside as that would allow me to launch off of the corner faster. On turn 5, it was that time of the race again. Like before, while this seemed easy, in reality, I did have to control the car while it was being constantly nudged by the walls to not make a 360 and win it all. On the last corner, I've managed to cut the distance between me and the Evo yet again. This time, I was less than a half a second away from taking P1 away from the rally car. Predictably, on the chicane, the Lancer could escape, but this time, I made it up by treating both the third and fourth corners as a very wide, singular corner. With no physics, all I needed to do was simply extending the already extended drift. This made for an optimal time across the section, which allowed me to prevent the Lancer from escaping our fight. With patience, I made my way past the small yet contradictory curves. The Lancer naturally could extend its lead, but not for long. By the final corner, you know the drill. It was time to do it again. Upon entering the fourth lap, I was barely a second behind. I took on the chicane carefully, and this time, on the third turn, I could keep the Evo from blasting off. On the straights, I repositioned the NSX instead to better take on the fourth corner, and once again, I was fast enough to prevent the Lancer from speeding off. While I took to turn 5 with creative liberty, I believe it was time to return to the honorable way on turn 6, as the little curves and corners awaiting afterwards would demand extra caution. As this was a 4th lap out of 5, I could not afford to make more reckless mistakes. Slowly and steadily, I made my way past the little corners, and when it was time to wall ride the last curve, I only have one mantra in my head: do it again. And that was it, the final lap, and I'm roughly half a second behind. This time, for some reason, I could get the NSX past the small corners faster than before, which would prove to be quite the cornerstone for what had happened next. Once again, I rode the walls of the last corner with blazing speeds to overcome the Lancer once and for all, and in my mind, it was all or nothing. Right before the finish line, I managed my comeback.
Yes! 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 Finally! That was insane!
With that win on the ice arena, the rest could be said as relatively easy. Chamonix got asphalt bits on it, so my NSX could take the lead on that while constantly on the defense on the snow parts. The same could be said for the Tahiti Maze and Yosemite Rally, where the Honda showed absolute dominance on the asphalt and fortress-like defense on the dirt. On the Swiss Alps, the track was wide enough and the corners were lean enough for me to practically do whatever I want, minus this section where I have to be careful for the bridge, but other than that, it was party time like no other. The George 5 rally, they were so pathetically easy. I don't think there's any need to shed any light towards them. To end my journey within the special condition events, I challenged the wet scuba race on hard difficulty, where I will race against this. A Le Mans prototype against an NSX concept. Let's do this. To the surprise of absolutely nobody, the R8 was gone from the start. I went a bit daring and braked a bit late, as if the track was not wet. Surprisingly, I managed to catch up. Of course, overconfidence heralded the fall. I almost lost control over the NSX as soon as I left the second corner, allowing the R8 to make the run for it. I tried a similar approach down turn 5, and this time I left turn 6 properly and kept up with the R8. While I was actually gaining on the R8, the NSX didn't grip the asphalt as much as I would have liked and traveled to the grass. Once again, the prototype eluded me. By the hairpin, I employed a careful throttle control, and like before, I kept up with the Audi around the corner. Naturally, My chance will not come here, as the R8 was faster on the straight line. Through all that, I have managed to complete a lap a second later than the R8. On the second lap, I carefully entered the first corner, controlled my throttle along the way, and left the curve better than the last time. As I was more consistent on this lap, the R8 had little chances of running away like a bandit. Down the fifth corner, I managed to keep the R8 as relatively close as I could. I made sure to be extra careful this time around, and avoided touching damp grass on turn 8. On the hairpin, things got a bit hairy as I failed to turn as sharp as needed, and almost threaded myself to the grass, which would mean giving the Audi the slip. Of course, the long straight allowed the R8 to elude me again, but by this lap, I think I have a good idea on what to do under these circumstances. Instead of hopelessly fighting the R8 in its home, how about I take advantage in where I was stronger, which obviously on the corners. And the Tsukuba circuit has lots and lots of corners. On the first corner, I went a few tires up the curb while making sure the NSX not go overboard and land on the grass. On turn 5, I braked late again and had to use a rather different racing line to compensate. This time, I took on the 8th corner with more confidence, and instead of being awfully cautious, I've gone for it. By the hairpin, I managed to get the NSX to switch lanes and finally overtake the R8. I know that the Le Mans prototype will try to take revenge on the straights. That's why I immediately placed myself right in front of it. The R8 had to concede as we arrived on the final corner of the lap. Not only I got to place the R8 on second place, I've also gotten to set a sub 1 minute time on this track under wet conditions. Now that's what I call improvement. After a smooth cornering experience down the first corner, I prepared myself to tackle the next few turns. To my surprise, I actually gapped the Le Mans prototype in this, out of all things. The gap was mended on the 5th corner, but still, it did happen. After that corner though, once again, the R8 was left lagging behind, much to my surprise. Even on the long straights, the R8 seemed to have lost all motivation after being overtaken, only to catch up by the last corner of the lap. On lap 5, I chose the inside lane on the first corner, thinking the R8 would do the exact same. Regardless of where the R8 actually was, I was still leading upon leaving the corner. I braked in time before turn 5 and take it in a rather conventional way as the car had the appropriate speed to do so. At this point, I was already used to driving on wet conditions. Plus, the Magic tires made this easier than it's supposed to be. Despite the wetness, I still have a decent amount of grip. I followed an ideal racing line down the hairpin, and by the long straights, the Le Mans prototype was utterly humiliated. I carefully went across the final corner, and before the Audi could even catch up, I was on my way to finish the race and special conditions once and for all. That was it. Probably the only 200-point race I'll ever win in this run.
Woo! It's done! Special conditions are done! Yes! Oh my god. It's over!
With the special conditions out of the way, it was time for me to bench the NSXR concept, as now it was the blue NSXR's turn. Before I take on the Tuning Car Cup, there was a Honda exclusive event that I had saved for this car specifically, the Type R meeting. The first NSX couldn't make it into the meeting because that was not a Type R. This time though, it's a full-blown R. Honestly, after hours upon hours toiling with the special conditions, going back to normal races felt like vacation. This is where I sit back, relax, and enjoy the Sunday ride. That, while watching occasional goofiness on the track, from this absolute blunder from the Black Integra in the twin-frame Motegi to this absolute comedy on the Motorland.
Eh? What is he doing? Why? What is he doing? Why would you do that? I thought I'll do the funny at like lap 5 or lap 6 so that I'm far enough to prove a point, but damn! What is he doing? I'm gonna try and do the funny. Hey, since you like pitting in so much, would you like to do it again? Oh wow. Alright, let's pretend he's a pace car now. Another one! Another one! Why? Why would you do that? This race is a joke. Yo, the joke writes itself. He's spitting it for no reason, man. Oh no. Okay, now to prevent him from doing... never mind, too late. Now I also committed skill issue. Oh. Ah, he does it himself. Yep, never mind. Everyone is spitting in. What the fuck? Papan. Look, it's gonna pin in. He's gonna pin in. Watch. Hey, you're. Sir, don't be in my way. You're being overlapped. Blocking people who are trying to overlap you should be a violation or something. You're really doing everything in your power. You really are doing everything in your power to make this easy for me. Thanks. Easy. Easy game. 2 laps. 2 laps. What is he doing? What are these people doing, honestly?
This NSXR, bone stock, had managed to trivialize the entirety of the Type R meeting. This event and the Japanese 90s festival were truly the calm before the storm. After the 90s festival was sorted out and the 400R claimed, it was time to take on the Japan Championship. If I remembered correctly, this was the tournament where I was robbed off my victory on Suzuka circuit by another NSX driver who took advantage of my sleep-deprived condition and hurled me onto the sands. This time though, I ensured to record this at a reasonable time and full focus to beat this event. On second thought, soft sports might be overkill for something like this. Let's go bone stock instead, assert some dominance. 157 points. Time to log in. Upon launching off the grid, I noticed that the FD was very much disturbed by his younger sister hogging the road. I took advantage of this and relied on the other NSX for the slipstream instead. Before long, the FD was taken care of. I braked late before the first corner, and as a result, I stroked the skyline and probably would not end up on good terms with whoever was driving that thing. Down the Coca-Cola I've gone, with precise throttle control to keep the Subaru from fleeing the fight, and around the 100R, the Impreza lost the mini chicken game, and I gained the lead as my reward. Wait a second, I'm going to win a lot of A-spec points from this race. Can't be this easy now, can it? And of course, it wasn't. By the 300R, I could hear the Impreza closing in, much to my surprise. I entered the chicane carefully, as at that time, being sent to the grass would mean losing all of my positions, which was not something that I could let happen. I expected the Impreza to attack on the long straights, but looks like the Subaru didn't have the required power to do such a thing. By the second lap's 100R, I have practically gapped the Impreza by a significant amount. Looks like it would be simple indeed. Or so I've thought. On the fourth lap, I went wider than expected. 2 wheels had left the asphalt and sooner or later, I would have to make the turn. Unfortunately, a rather crude release from the grass sent the NSX absolutely out of control. Even with all the advantage I have built, the Impreza still managed to retake first place. I had to block the other NSX from advancing as a very much needed form of damage control. And after that, it was time to retake my post. Down the Panasonic, I tailed the Subaru for lowered wind resistance. And on the long straights, I absolutely refused to let the Impreza escape. The Subaru chickened out and braked early before the first corner. That was something I could take advantage of by pulling a gamble. I braked much later, overtook the Subaru while braking, and prayed that the NSX would be slow enough before the asphalt was abandoned. Thankfully, the NSXR managed to slow down enough for me to make the turn. That was P1 back in hand, and now to lead the race all the way until the end. This time, I made sure the NSX was nowhere close to the grass down the 100R, and adopted a much more aggressive approach down the hairpin to shake the Impreza off. On the chicane, I ensured the NSX to stay away from the curbs instead, as I figured that way I could make it out from the corner faster. After the Panasonic curve was through, I hammered down, pedaled completely to the metal, so I could secure my first win in the Japanese Championship. The next run was set in Tsukuba Circuit, a track that I've gotten very familiar with across the run. Before the first corner, the pack was able to leave me in the dust. Only for a moment though, as the first corner slowed them down enough for me to catch up. I might have gone too fast on this corner as I ended up too wide and had to run off the grass. This, of course, was not helpful in my quest to win the challenge. However, I remained calm, got the NSX back on track, and kept the pursuit going. I overtook the FD by using this creative line. Of course, the other NSX wasn't happy about this and tried to run me off the road. Lucky for me, the 7th turn discouraged the white NSX from pursuing this murder attempt further, allowing me to get back on the road and affirm my spot at 4th place. I refused to be stuck behind the RX-8 down the hairpin, so I made the NSX turn as hard as I could and squeezed my way to P3 as hard as I could. Right at the start of the long straight, I was at an advantageous position where I could seal the deal and finally claim my place on the podium. However, the Skyline and the Impreza both showed superiority in speed as they sped off on the straights. I was not to give up so easily though, as by this point, I'm aware of the dynamic. By the second lap's first corner, I was already right behind them again. I kept on tailing the Impreza down the next couple of corners and tried to do an overtake on the 5th corner. Unfortunately, I did climb too much, which ironically slowed the progress of taking P2 away from the Subaru. Not by that much though, as by the end of this corner, I managed to outspeed the Impreza and landed myself the silver medal. Now, all I had to do was to hunt down and beat the Skyline. I tailed the Nissan down a couple of corners, and right on the 5th corner, I took the inside lane and outraced the Skyline then and there. Afterwards, there were little to no resistance, as by the second checkpoint, I was exactly a second ahead from the Skyline. By lap 7, I was already leading by a significant margin. I decided to keep my driving at my best by carefully going around the first corner of the lap. Proper throttle control, combined with the car's grip, had allowed me to realize the racing line I've set for the track. The curves helped in determining my route going forward, and by the 5th corner, I once again noticed the apex of the curve and accordingly turned the car around, carrying as much momentum as I could down the curve. I went full throttle down the 8th corner, completely counting on the car to do its part, which it absolutely did beautifully. I properly made my way around the hairpin and greeted the long straights with all that the car's VTEC-powered engine could muster. All of those efforts had allowed me to score quite a lap. At this point, the Skyline was worlds behind, proving to be no match to the mighty sports car. The next race was set in Tokyo. This time, I couldn't do much on the straight, as rest of the grid was as fast as me on a straight line, if not faster as their cars may have been slightly modified. On the first corner though, it was my time to rise and grind. By going so tight on the corner, I have practically hogged all of the curves to myself. I swiftly rose to take my position on the podium. Not long after that, the Impreza was taken off to the 2nd place. I was able to tail the Skyline down the 7th corner, and while the Nissan showed torso attack, my current position would not allow me to take them. The Skyline has squandered its opportunity by going wide. On turn 8, I made my move, and despite the Skyline's violent protests, 1st place was already at hand. So far, so good. I thought victory was already in the bag, when suddenly, a disgustingly foul play was acted. Either out of desperation or spite, the Skyline had successfully thrown me back to last place. A quick, uncomfortable tinge of anger surged from within, but I had to be calm, recollect myself, and do it all again. It was still the 2nd lap out of a journey of 5 laps after all. I wouldn't be able to take the lead back if I ping-pong all over Japan's capital in a tantrum. Instead, I converted these unstable feelings into focus, so I could start dismantling them all, one by one, in a state of heightened performance, boosted by a quiet rage.
Ready or not, Skyline, I'm coming for you!
The Impreza, innocent as he was on that assassination attempt, still was not spared from my streak, as I exposed his cowardice upon entering the 10th corner. And now, only the Skyline remained in between me and my victory. We should have run while we could. Thoughts of running that distasteful driver to any of Tokyo's many walls ran in my head. How would I do it? Where would I do it? But in the end, I have decided to return the favor through a simple overtake to show that I did not need any dirty trick to run circles all over him. The Skyline might have been able to make a brief comeback before the final turn. However, I was in a better position to make the turn, and so I ended this laughable attempt before the lap had ended. On the 3rd lap, I was completely wary of another attempt at foul play. Fortunately, it looked like the Skyline driver had learned his lessons, as even the Impreza managed to overtake him. By the final lap, I was already leading by a great margin, and looks like what goes around comes around, as the Skyline was no longer in 2nd. I maintained a proper racing line down the 1st corner, going in and out from the curves in order to maintain the ideal line. As the tires had been properly heated, I felt no fear as I took on a rather narrow uphill section with no brakes. Unfortunately, something weird did happen around turn 6. It was as if a phantom shifted the car down by 2 gears. I quickly returned to the car to the third gear and kept the show going. Carefully, I made it past the 7th corner, while admittedly, I've gone wider than I had planned. This proved to be of little consequence though, as I was still leading by a large margin. Shortly after I made my way past the first checkpoint, I was given a glimpse on what was happening behind, a sign that I was on the correct pace towards victory. I made my way past the 10th corner by turning the NSX as hard as I could, while keeping an eye on the speed to prevent the car from snapping out of control. On the next corner, I tried to take the shortest possible line, while hammering the throttle down, trusting my NSX would remain optimal down the corner. Admittedly, I was bringing too much speed towards turn 13. As a result, I had to take a subpar line with lower speeds to prevent a much more devastating accident. No matter though, I was still in the lead. After I went out and out on the final corner, I hammered the NSX down the straight. It was time to put this round to bed while I still was ahead. And finally, I have managed to win the 3rd race in the Japan Championship. I would be lying if I said that the fact that the Skyline dropped down to 5th place did not bring a smile to my face. The next round was set in the twin ring Motegi. This time, the opposition was a bit tough. The first corner had passed, I was still dead last, where the pack was slowly but surely leaving me behind. By turn 2, I managed to rejoin them, but even then, I was still at last place, I have to admit. Especially after falling victim to such a gnarly maneuver, I felt dirty about doing that to the other NSX. But I can assure you, this was pure accident. Regardless, I packed these feelings in and moved on to win the race. I tailed the RX-8 down the 6th corner and made my move on turn 7. After a swift takeover, it was time to challenge the Impreza and the Skyline. I thought this maneuver would allow me to overtake the Subaru then and there. However, this time, the Impreza was not going to roll over so easily, unlike last time. However, chance came on a hairpin, where through light braking, the Impreza was finally through. At the end of the speed section, I once again showed my superiority in braking by overtaking the Nissan right before the sharp turn. And just like that, P1 was at hand. After this point, the twin ring Motegi round ran smooth compared to the rounds before, landing me an easy 4th win of the tournament. The last round was set on the Suzuka circuit. The last time I was here, I fell victim to both my own hubris and the other NSX's disgusting actions. This time, I was still full of energy, and I was looking to redeem myself from that defeat. On this race, the FD didn't play around, immediately going around its younger sister to avoid being held back by the traffic, something I could take inspiration from. I tried penetrating onto the back of the first turn. The RX-8 did widen out, practically handing me P5 on a silver platter. On the entrance towards the S-curves, I attempted an attack on the DFD, which did not turn out as good as I would have hoped. To make things worse, the traffic managed to trap me behind them around turn 5. By turn 6, things got worse as apparently 4 of these drivers had the same idea. Finally, I've managed my way past the Skyline. From that point onwards, I was unleashed. In one swift movement, I took the FD out of relevancy, only to realize the earlier bits of the Dunlop curve was quite deceptive. I braked and awkwardly made my way through, as I had to let the FD reclaim its spot on the podium. Instead, I patiently tailed the Mazda down the curve and enjoyed the slipstream as we passed the Degner curve. By the 9th corner, the RX-7 made quite a big mistake and ate sand on the side. I quickly seized the opportunity and claimed 3rd place to myself. I took it to myself to duel the Type S before I had to brake for the hairpin. While risky, I was able to brake in time after I claimed P2 to myself. As if to mirror the first round, the final opponent I had to face before ultimate victory was once again the Impreza. The NSX flew by, waiting for a chance to strike, yet the spoon curve thwarted this attempt. I continued my pursuit on the Impreza, but was not entirely sure on how to take on the blind 15 corners, so this happened. While I was slowing down for the KCO triangle, the NSX tried to take revenge, but this poorly timed attack failed to achieve anything. That didn't even nudge me enough to make a chain reaction with the clueless Impreza before me. Regardless, my performance around the chicane allowed me to get closer to the Subaru. First turn of the second lap, I have nailed the Impreza and gained P1. After the hairpin, I have begun to create a significant lead, which will serve well in solidifying my winning streak. As the spoon curve was a collection of 2 corners, I decided to take the big, collective approach and went for the wide approach. Calmly, I drove the car down the second half of the curve, following a lean racing line to keep leading the race. By the second checkpoint, I've managed to get my rivals by quite a margin, as was shown before I tackled turn 15, more than 3 seconds in front of V2. Looks like the FD was showing its true capabilities lately. I might have been lucky that the FD didn't start out front, seeing how well that car's been performing in the last few rounds. That could have given me quite a trouble, I'd imagine. Regardless of what ifs, I continued to push forward, maintaining a persistent performance throughout the race. I blazed past the finish line to enter the third lap. There were no noticeable distance markers for the first turn. I had to rely on instincts built upon hours of experience and brake in time to take on the corner. On the S-curves, I used the curves to identify the apexes of each curve. Of course, upon entering the duel curve, I was on guard, completely remembering how deceptive this corner really was. The Deckner curve by itself was not difficult, but it was the calm before the storm. I slowed down to keep the car within the track's limits on turn 9, avoiding the common pitfalls my rivals seemed to fall to. On the spoon curve, I went a bit more decisive on the corners and firmly made my choices along the turn. However, I admit, I should have gone slower in the second half of this curve, as a bit of me went onto the sand, endangering the entire run. This time, I was spared, and on the 15th corner, I decided to make the turn early to keep my momentum while not violating track's limits. I carefully made my way past the Casio triangle to keep the car towards the ideal racing line given my circumstances, and made my way towards the final lap. This time, the tires were on peak condition, sufficiently heated from the previous laps to tackle trials and tribulations this track would provide. Alright, while my approach for the first turn this time around was rather awkward, I think I still made the best out of the odd situation, despite the dicey exit. Like before, I used the curves on each curve on the S-curves to determine the apexes of each curve, and planned my racing line based on those. I slowed the car down to properly take on the duel curve, and on turn 9, I utilized the curve once again to make an even more optimal racing line. This time, I used the entirety of the track's width to tackle the hairpin as fast as I could. I properly took on the blind corner before the spoon curve, and on the corner itself, I managed to keep the momentum and avoid going off track. On the Casio triangle, I managed to score a textbook racing line down the chicane, while almost eating sand on my way out. Once I was freed from the corners, I hammered it down to put an end to this championship on a high note. After 5 long races, I have finally done it. The Japan Championship was perfectly won. And after upgrading the NSX a bit further, it was time to face the storm, the Tuning Car Cup. The first round was set on the Apricot Hill Raceway. Me in a tuned NSX against a bunch of tuner cars in probably racing mediums. Knowing that a 400 horsepower NSX would definitely will spin its way out of the grid, I launched on the second gear, which turned out to be a good idea as I could immediately overtake the S2000. A short slipstream allowed me to take on the Golf as well as the Yellowbird. I thought the Red Celica would be easy prey, yet the tuned machine had proven me wrong. I dueled the surprisingly fast Celica down the first corner, and shortly after, wrestled the silver medal off this rather fun character. On the first checkpoint, the BTR seemed to have the better hand in power compared to the NSX, which managed to help it under the hairpin. On the straights, I have entered the slipstream range and aimed for a slingshot takeover. However, that corner at the end forced me to stay my hand and look for a better chance. After I carefully made my way past the S-curves, as well as the final corner of the lap, I stepped down on the gas and floored it, relying on the car's added power and reduced wind resistance to overtake the BTR right before the first lap had ended. The BTR tried a comeback on the first corner, yet it was too slow to face the NSX after being overtaken. I thought I was safe until I made quite the error at the end of the S-curves and allowed the BTR to retake victory. Like before, I used the long straight line to slingshot my way through and put me back on the first place. Unfortunately, I was overconfident in my car's abilities to the point of overshooting the first corner of the final lap. Once again, the BTR managed to retake first place. Our battle continued as I hunted this car down the track until I could retake my post after a hairpin through sheer power. On turn 8, I controlled my speed to keep the NSX close to the curbs after figuring out the BTR would also use this racing line. As expected, my prediction became reality as the BTR frantically looked for another door to go through. Around the 10th corner, the NSX went too far to the other edge of the track and almost let the BTR back in first place. This, of course, was unacceptable. And so, I went in and defended myself by occupying the tuned Porsche's racing line. While this won't give me the fastest of lap times, it will secure my lead throughout the race, as these corners are the roof's last chances to win the race. By the final straights, the NSX outclassed the roof through speed and claimed the first victory of the cup. The third run was set on Tokyo. Oh yeah, the second run was too easy. I didn't think it would worth any limelight in the video at this point. Anyways, before the first corner, I already managed to secure my audience with a BTR, with some price to pay on the first turn. Not gonna lie, this much power in an NSX equipped with sports grade tires felt weird. Maybe I really shouldn't have skipped on the GT wing just because it made my NSX look weird. The NSX that once dominant on the corners now could only make a comeback on the straights due to an apparent yet ironic lack of handling. And as of the first half of this layout's filled with corners, the BTR has made a 2-second gap by checkpoint number 2. By the hairpin, I have somehow closed this disgustingly large gap and started to hunt the tuned Porsche down on the straights. Normally I would hit the nitrous here, but that wasn't exactly an option because, well, there's no nitrous system in the car. Unfortunately, my brief victory had blinded me towards the bigger picture. After being treated like a cushion by the BTR, it was time to chase the Porsche down all over the track. Again. Time truly is a flat circle. With this rather imbalanced setup, I tried my best on keeping the Porsche close down those second and third corners. The brief straights did help as I could get a bit closer to the roof, and this time, I did what I could to keep the NSX line tight and orderly down turn 4. This time, I was only a second behind by the second checkpoint, which is a good sign as that meant I had more fighting chance on the final straight, where my chances of victory truly rested. After the hairpin, I went for it, relying on the upgraded VTEC and slipstream to outpace the BTR. Soon, I was able to get close enough, change lanes and claim P1 through sheer power. That was it, the third round in hand. The semi-final round was set on the... Oh no. Normally I'll be happy to use this car on the El Capitan, but this time, I wasn't so sure. Well, guess I'll just have to do what I could. Somehow I forgot to launch from the second gear, and as a result, I had to triple launch and was momentarily left behind by my rivals. It was a good thing that the NSX was packing monstrous power under the hood and claimed the S2000's place right before the first corner. However, I failed to comprehend the curve before me and sent myself to the walls, which had ended up giving the Golf a place on the podium again. I quickly rectified this error and officially started my hunt against the two Porsches. This odd sensation of understeer kept the NSX from hitting the apex on turn 11. However, I wasted no time in taking advantage of the brief straights to slingshot away from the BTR. Our fight for second continued to the 12th corner, where power was still a defining factor. Finally, I've managed to leave the BTR behind and focus my attention towards the yellow bird. As the car lost some of its control on a steep downhill, I was slightly terrified. The last time the NSX did sort of thing, I ended up on the 5th place during my True Blue run. That was something that I could definitely not let happen again. Fortunately, the NSX was still within salvation and I considered my hunt resumed. Though from how fast the Yellowbird was, I could see that this would not be an easy task. I made the NSX stuck to the inside lane down turn 20. As I left the right turn, I pondered on how will I ever take the lead off that Yellowbird. Even on the long straights, I couldn't immediately get close and personal, which honestly was kind of worrying. This time, I went down the first corner with proper speed. Compared to my previous attempt, this is an objective improvement. I followed the racing line I've developed from the amount of experience of me racing on this beautiful yet treacherous track. Yet, the Yellowbird didn't show any signs of weakness either. Though by the hairpin, I could feel I've drawn closer towards the roof. Before the 12th turn, I actually was on the Yellowbird's slipstreaming range. I used this as a chance to finally claim what was rightfully mine, and I was almost successful at it too, if only I weren't so overly cautious on the uphill section of the track. And just like that, the Yellowbird had reclaimed P1. To get that victory back, I will have to look at a bigger picture. I remained patient and unrelenting on my discipline on taking the better racing lines, and on the final corner of the lap, I remained on the inside while the Yellowbird widened out. This time, just after entering the final lap, I could actually make the slingshot maneuver, and after roughly 3 grueling minutes, I could finally catch the Yellowbird. On the first corner, I noticed the Yellowbird's attempt in taking the golden trophy back. I sped the car a bit to defend myself, only to realize that the NSX went too wide for my liking. No matter what I've done, the Yellowbird was simply too fast for the NSX on these corners, which had earned him victory here. However, I did not plan to stop there. I planned to redeem myself and fight to the very end. On turn 9, I saw the Yellowbird absolutely binning into the gravel. I thought this was a prime chance to end this fight once and for all and claim the 4th victory then and there. I managed to get personal, and on the hairpin, I have finally managed to catch the Yellowbird once more. I kept my lane tight on the 12th corner, and after that high-speed section was behind me, the most dangerous part of the track was before me. This time, I decided to be a bit brave and only slowed the car down a bit before I hit the gas and took on the corner. Unfortunately, the Yellowbird was still faster than me on the section, Despite the obvious opportunity that I had on turn 16, I made the turn too early, and instead of making a comeback, I slammed onto the yellow bird, which resulted in a rough became comfortable in the lead once again. However, I still had one last chance, the short yet high-speed section after turn 20, so I closely followed the yellow bird up to the final corner, took on the corner carefully, and after the left that rather sharp turn, I put the hammer down. In the end, my hard work bore fruit. I have managed to retake my win on the very last second. I have successfully redeemed myself from the poor, sleep-deprived attempt during my true blue run. And now, for the final round. Tsukuba Circuit. At this point, we're practically very close friends. Prior to this race, I've went around this track at the very least 20 times, not to mention that one time I beat a Le Mans prototype in an NSXR concept on this very same track. The S2000 was overtaken right around the first corner, marking the end of that car's— oh, he actually fought back. Alright, that's cool. It's not like I could easily overturn this brief comeback attempt right on the third corner anyway. To my surprise, by the fifth turn, it was actually the Celica that was leading, instead of any of the roughs. Speaking of, I almost lost it all at the end of the corner there. After I recovered myself, it was time to actually run the gauntlet and overtake them all. So far, I was lagging behind. From my experience, my chance to catch up with the rest of the grid would be at the upcoming hairpin, and caught up I did. The NSX being faster than the rest of the grid on the straights was a nice bonus that helped in sending chills down whoever's driving that yellow bird. Before the final corner of the lap, I have managed to claim yet another position. Sure, the yellow bird might have reclaimed P4 for a while, however, the deeper we'd gone towards the corner, the faster my NSX became. On the second lap, I was determined to catch the rest of them all. I went deep, very deep down the first corner to challenge the Golf. Thanks to this maneuver, I managed to launch off the corner from a much better position and reach the podium then and there. On turn 5, the BTR went too wide. I went for the gap that existed. The Celica squandered any lead it had by doing whatever maneuver that was, which practically made it very easy for me to take the golden medal. I immediately sealed the deal by launching off from the 6th corner faster, and after I took on the hairpin, I used all the power this upgraded NSX could muster and sped off to victory. And that was lap 2, done in less than a minute, almost a second faster than my wet Tsukuba run, proving that the wet surface really was dampening my performance. Regardless, once the Celica was overtaken, all that was left for me on this run was an impromptu time trial, for as long as I don't screw up in a big way, none of them would have any hope of beating me here. By the last lap, the inevitable happened. The Yellowbird claimed P2 and immediately, he gapped the rest of the grid. This event got me distracted so much I forgot how to properly turn on the 7th corner and briefly visited the grass. Lucky for me, this small oversight didn't jeopardize my lead at all, and so, I've managed to end the final race of the Tuning Car Cup in first place. At last, a perfect clear on this particular event, truly a sign of growth for yours truly. Now, while racing exclusively in NSXs would not give you access to the World Championship because you cannot clear all of the beginner and professional leagues only with NSXs. However, there's one tournament you can enter that's also filled with race cars and also has 10 rounds. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the All Japan GT Championship. 10 races in tournament format, and you'll be racing in JGTC models. They're not quite Le Mans prototype vehicles, but still, they're powerful in their own regard. After all, among them was the Godzilla itself, the Cult-Sonic Skyline R32. While the challenge technically allows me to get myself a GT500 NSX as, well, it is still an NSX, I figured why didn't I make it interesting and beat this mini world championship with this blue NSX. I'll just max this car out without the exhaust upgrade and the customizable transmission so the car doesn't sound like a vacuum cleaner, get some racing grade tires on, and change the oil for more horsepower. And then, to the championship, I've gone. The first round was set on Tokyo. I was so confident I didn't even bother qualifying. Overtaking them all from the last place would make for more content anyway. Whether that was cockiness born of folly or confidence born from competence, we shall see. After a brief moment driving this now nearly maxed NSX, I could feel the awkwardness that I felt on the tuning car cup was gone, probably due to the racing lines which was able to properly keep the NSX grounded. I tailed the blue skyline down the corner, while on the first checkpoint, the red Sanavi seemed to have the upper hand. I was just getting started though. I made my way past the third corner, and instead of the blue Sanavi, I got to overtake the Calsonic skyline instead. I tried penetrating through the inside lane on turn 4, while initially that didn't land a hit. My consistency in my racing line eventually paid off. With these racing tires, I could unleash all of the NSX's potential, which showed on the car keeping complete control throughout the corner on full throttle. On the next corner, I figured to use a similar approach to handle the green NSX. This maneuver succeeded in threatening the Castrol NSX's place on the podium, which I managed to snatch out of pure power. By the second checkpoint, I have managed to cut the distance between me and the current race leader in half. I followed the Motul Pitward Z down the narrow downward section of the track and managed to place myself within range to strike. Before the hairpin, I've managed to catch the Z. As on the hairpin itself, I managed to occupy the inner lane. With blazing speed, I have finally managed to overtake the red Sanavi skyline. Just like that, the mighty Super GT cars were on their proverbial knees in the face of a NSXR that wasn't even equipped with racing grade exhausts. Around the straights, however, these race cars, or at least half of them, weren't exactly pushovers. By the second lap, I could only gap the Sanavi for almost half a second. This is where I absolutely put my focus to post a faster lap in hopes of getting my rivals off my neck. On the second corner, I made a bold move and climbed up the curves for a leaner line. While this seemed reckless, it absolutely helped in taking the next turn from a vantage point. With these two corners neatly chained together, I sped towards the winding fourth corner. There, both the car's grip on the asphalt and my skills at throttle control would be simultaneously tested. Without going too far up the curves, I captured the NSX on the inside lane. And as if the car was on rails, the Honda kept to the lane as I kept the throttle levels at optimal levels. Despite all of these efforts, I was barely faster than the Sanavi, which wasn't even half a second behind. Only a single mistake, and the Skyline would retake the leading position. And after turn 9, the greatest challenge this track would provide would arrive. I smoothly went past the corner, and as the guardrail slowly but surely narrowed the track down, I braced myself. I put my trust in the NSX, yanked the wheels to the left, and hoped the car would make as much contact to the walls as aliens do with Earth. And thankfully, this trusty car did exactly that. I employed a rather careful throttle control down the hairpin and launched off of it with blazing acceleration. This time, I somehow managed to create a significant rift between me and the rest of the grid on the straights. I kept the pedal to the metal all the way to the fourth lap. Lo and behold, 2 seconds. Despite the tires were starting to show signs of wear and tear, I kept on racing with the fullest of my abilities. Sure, this meant more tire usage, which probably was the lead cause of my deteriorating performance on the final lap that brought the Sanavi way too close for comfort on the third turn. But in the end, I still managed to escape the Super GT contestant and recorded my first victory in the tournament. The second race was set on the east course of Suzuka Circuit. This is the beginner-friendly edition of the famously difficult track, consisting only the S-curves. Therefore, the once large track was greatly reduced in length. To compensate, we were required to complete 12 whole laps of the track. I thought as the track was small, racing softs would still be enough, just like how they were enough to handle the first round. By the first corner, I had managed my way towards the podium. Like before, the real challengers on this race would be the Motul Pitward Z and the Sanavi Skyline. The former made quite the mistake of taking the first curve cautiously. That was all that I needed to claim second place. To catch the latter though, I would need more effort. I tailed the Sanavi down curve after curve like a roller coaster ride. Before the S-curves had ended, I launched my assault. By pulling towards the inner lane on the corner, I managed to overtake and secure first place away from the Sanavi Skyline. Just like that, I managed to claim first place before entering the second lap, a rather early victory for me. Now all I had to do was to defend this position by simply keeping my pace. Lap after lap, my lead against the rest of the grid became larger and larger. Even on the 7th lap, I was ahead by more than 6 seconds from the Sanavi Skyline. However, there were still 6 laps under the race, this one included, and my left tires were starting to be spent. This is where I started to feel the consequences of my hubris. After the tires stopped being green, the rate of usage became rapid. By lap 9, these tires had become even worse, to the point of me having to significantly slow down before the third curve just so I could make the turn. On the 10th lap, the car struggled to make even the first turn. As a result of the soft tires were simply did. The 1/6 seconds advantage was degraded unto a mere sub 2 seconds lead by the 11th lap, and on this precise lap, things got wrong. Horribly wrong. The NSX could no longer keep a sufficient pace nor grip to handle the S-curves and had to slow down to the point of the Skyline and the Z managed to retake their positions and leaving me on 3rd place. I thought I was being overly cautious and the NSX could use more speed, so I did just that. It turned out I wasn't being overly cautious. The tires weren't able to take much more of this extended usage and had completely given out. By the final lap, it felt like there were no rubber around my tires. My choices were to pit in, which would take roughly 20 seconds on the final lap, which will put me in last place, or to endure one more lap and defend myself from further overtakes. Obviously, I picked the latter option. At this point, the car could not turn better than a stock Plymouth. By the 4th curve, I could hear another Skyline was haunting me from behind. Try as I might, I could not keep the Calisthenic Skyline from claiming its place on the podium. The tires were simply too weak for the job. What was supposed to be a simple corner turned to be a great struggle. Right after the final curve, the Skyline took 3rd place. After the final corner was through, I prayed the NSX was still somehow faster on the straights from the last 2 contestants. Thankfully, it was. However, this defeat had overturned my lead on the championship. Now, the Sanavi was in the lead for points. The next round was set in the heart of South Korea, Seoul Central. To not have a redo from that horrible result, I switched to the medium compound. Surely, these tires would be durable enough. Right off the bat, the red Sanavi Skyline showed dominance by making an early gap compared to the rest. Yet from the other side of the grid, I refused to be reduced into a scaredy cat. Instead, I aimed to take P5 early. Before the 4th corner, I have finally managed to correctly overtake the Hiroto machine, and I decided to take on the Calisthenic Skyline from the outside. Of course, that plan would have gone without a hitch had whatever brain lag that was commandering the Calisthenic didn't take me down with him. The accident had sent me back to 6th place. While I was quite annoyed by this outcome, no good would come from exacting violent vengeance upon that buffoon. Instead, I went a bit tactical with my revenge. The brief slipstream had given my NSX enough speed to slingshot past the Castrol-sponsored Honda, and then it was time to bring down the top contenders of the tournament. Not even this paltry 5 seconds distance will stop me from achieving victory and reclaiming my position on the top in this tournament. I remain on the inner lane of the roundabout, which managed to cut the distance even further. On turn 4, I managed to make the turn from the proper position without banging on the wall like an absolute fool. Calisthenic Skyline, you doof! I braked around 50 meters from the 7th corner and made the turn without shedding any of this beautiful blue paint on the walls. And while my cornering on the final turn could do some work, this was acceptable performance, as I was still making progress on catching up to the Skyline. Unfortunately, by the 3rd lap's roundabout, I went too deep onto the corner, and instead of a smooth experience, I gave myself a rough one after making contact with the stone walls. By turn 3, I was in the range to enjoy slipstream from the pitwork, which means the time to claim 2nd place was close. Very close. I kept on tailgating the Z on the straights leading to the 7th corner, and looks like, once again, I was blinded from the bigger picture, and impatiently took 2nd place, leading the car to hit the wall head on, and basically made things much worse for myself. And even by the reduced speed, I still was a bit too wide for the final corner. This time, surely I'll get it. Well, not ideal, but that will do. Despite my efforts, I still was unable to overtake the Motul pitwork by the 4th lap. On the 3rd turn, I engaged the Z once more, and to avoid potential screw-ups, I decided to hang back for a bit before resuming my attack after the 5th corner. On the straights leading to turn 7, I dueled the pitwork once more. This time, I managed to rise above the temptation and brake in time to handle 7th corner properly. After a long, intense fight, I could finally take advantage of the Z's overly cautious nature and made a switchback overtake down the final corner of the lap. To add to the good news, the car did not go too wide on the corner either. Optimal performance all around. 2nd place secured, it was prime time for me to start the hunt against the Sanavi Skyline. So far, so good. While I've gone through half the race to gain 1st, by the 2nd checkpoint, we were only 2 seconds apart. Should I keep this up, I should be able to claim 1st place before the final lap. I kept on improving, no longer making obvious mistakes down the roundabout, and by the 6th lap's 2nd checkpoint, it was confirmed that I was getting closer. By lap 9, I was only half a second off. As we were approaching the roundabout, I could finally pull myself close from the slipstream. The Skyline was lucky, the roundabout saved him from defeat. Or did it? The gambit worked. I still could brake in time and slow the NSX enough to properly handle the round corner. Upon leaving the roundabout, I could even create quite a gap against the skyline. The high-speed section allowed me a bit of time for recollection. I saw the tires still on the green area, and I only have a lap and a half left to run. I was relieved to see I was correct. Racing mediums were the way to go in this tournament. From that point, I could streamline my approach towards the next turn as well. By the second checkpoint, the tables had been completely turned. With no more Super GTs pressuring me from behind, I could take on the 7th corner with a clear mind and create a personal best before the final lap. By the 10th lap, the skyline was left in the dust, proving that it was never how you start a race. It's how you finish it. And this time, I managed to finish it on a high note. With this victory, I managed to retake the lead in the tournament by just 1 point. While that was not much, this is all I needed to start rebuilding my dominance over the championship. The 4th round was set on the Fuji Speedway, the 90s variant. Before the first corner, I've managed to rise above the chaos and nail P3. On the corner itself, I was able to get up close and personal with the Z. I kept on pressuring the pitwork car down at 100R, but the Nissan showed impressive resolution this time around. However, by the hairpin, the Z went too wide. Finally, my chance to grab P2. Then, it was time to bring the Sanavi down yet again. On the 300R, I slowly braked through the Sanavi's defenses and managed to claim P1 before the chicane. On the final corner, things were looking good. They were foaming for an easy round this time around. However, if there was something infamous about MR cars, it was snap oversteer. While I managed to avoid the phenomenon throughout the run, even on the rally stages, it managed to happen right here on the 100R. For some reason, the car oversteered to the right. I tried correcting the car, but then it snapped to the left, making a complete 180. By the time I managed to pull the car back to the track, the Sanavi was already in first. Honestly, I had no idea what caused this. Really, no idea. Prior to this event, I went through that corner dozens of times and that didn't happen. 3 seconds behind the Sanavi, and this time, it's at least partially caused by fucking bullshit. Okay, calm down. Let's assess our advantages. The NSX is faster on the corners. That was proven already. And it has enough power to pull off slingshots. And right on. By the 3rd lap, I managed to interrupt the Z's attempt in overtaking the skyline before turn 1. Now, the Z was in first place, which was good news all around, if I managed to win the race that is. This time, on the 100R, the same thing happened right when I was about to retake first away from the pitwork. At this point, I'm 85% convinced that this race was rigged, and that weird section on the 100R was how the conniving little shit did it. Again, I was cast to the bronze medal. At least this time, I didn't mess it all up on the hairpin like before. On the chicane, the Sanavi was overtaken. Compared to the previous lap, the situation seemed more manageable. On the 4th lap, I managed to apply more pressure on the Z from the first corner. I kept the Z close throughout the Coca-Cola and stuck close all the way to the 100R, where this time, I deliberately went slower to prevent the car from going out of control. Magically, that did the trick. I managed to keep up with the Z without unknowingly shooting myself on the foot. With lessons I've learned throughout this journey, I managed to avoid spinning out on the hairpin, which was what I needed to restore order and reclaim that golden medal. While I could feel the Z was itching for revenge around the chicane, I remained steadfast and made my way through with an ideal racing line. After a Panasonic, I hammered the pedal to the metal and gunned for it. At long last, I have managed to score a decent lap around this track. With cautionary procedures learned and applied on the go, I managed to make my way past the 100R safely for the remainder of the race, which closed what could possibly be their only chance to regain first place. I raced down the long straight far ahead from my rivals, and in the end, I managed to claim the full victory of the tournament. The 5th round of the championship was set on the...
No! No! No!
Yep, no chance. I could have qualified and both the Sanavi Skyline and the Motul Pitwork Z would have made an offer to take someone down the line anyway. This is an awful track. You can practically be the stick for all I care. As long as your car has less speed on the straights, it won't matter. Next round. Laguna Seca. Sanity and coherence have returned at last. On the Andretti hairpin, I noticed the Hiroto went too wide for the corner. I went through the inside and made quick work of the bottom feeder. On the 3rd turn, I decided to take the Calsonic out from 4th place as soon as possible. After that 4th corner, I noticed that the grid was becoming a bit dispersed, with the Sanavi Skyline far away in front. On the Rahal streak, I have gotten close enough to the Z to start slipstreaming, and in almost no time at all, I managed to claim a spot on the podium by taking the Z out of it. On the famed corkscrew, I perfectly tailed the Castrol NSX in preparation of my eventual takeover. Right before the rainy curve, I thought I've claimed P2 all for myself, yet the Green Racer was surprisingly still has a burst of speed to redeem itself. This second win did not save the race car in the 10th corner though. Now, it was time to chase down and catch the Sanavi Skyline. Something must be done to repair the damage that the accursed super speedway round has done. On the second lap, my performance throughout the Hendrity hairpin had pretty much closed the large gap the Sanavi Skyline once had. On the 5th corner, I managed to push the NSX and took the corner on high speeds, which brought the car towards the Skyline's slipstreaming range. Unfortunately, immediate gratification had blinded me once again towards the bigger picture. After I got myself out from the sands, I resumed my chase against the Sanavi Skyline. This time, the hunt went for a long, intense time. I only managed to close my distance by the final corner. On the 3rd lap by the Andretti hairpin, I managed to apply pressure on the Skyline's lead. As the red Skyline widened out, I took my chances. This time, I was unpunished for my move, simply because I did it alright. The better racing line, the better technique down the corner, all led to this hard-earned victory. From that point on, my mission would be defending this spot with all I have. Through experience, I decided that marker 1 would be the ideal spot for me to start braking and turning, which ended up pretty well in my opinion, as I was still ahead from the rampaging red Skyline. On turn 6, I made good use of the slightly banked nature of the corner and drove through the corner on high speeds. On the corkscrew, I ensured caution as I handled the famed downhill chicane, ensuring the NSX remained under control, free from pesky wheel spin, and brought as much momentum as I could down this sharp, dangerous corner. I entrusted myself to the NSX's outstanding grip down the 10th corner as I raced down the corner on full throttle. This technique had allowed me to extend my lead against the Sanavi, solidifying my win further over the race car. On the final corner, I decided to use all of the track and aggressively went through the sharp left. On the straights, I floored the car down the straights to record a personal best, as well as adding more seconds of advantage against my fiercest rival in the cup. As the race had progressed, my advantage only had grown bigger and bigger. See? This is what happens when you put me in a track that actually requires driving skill instead of near brain dead turn left simulator. On the 4th lap, while the Sanavi was fumbling on a corkscrew, I was speeding down the rainy curve. The gap between us had never gotten lower than 2 seconds from that point on. And after a long intense drive, I managed to etch another victory to the books, as well as 10 extra points in the championship. This achievement had gotten me in the lead by 5 points, quite the insurance policy in case of anything going wrong within the cup. The 7th round of this tournament was set on Hongka. Narrow, dangerous, filled with pitfalls that will eat you alive should you fall on them. With the good news, this is exactly the kind of track I could work with given my circumstances. The first checkpoint, the Sanavi was so far ahead despite the race had just started. Seems familiar? It is. From that point, I knew it was time to get things going. Before the hairpin, I braked a bit too late in my bid to overtake the Kiroto, and as a result, I think I wronged exactly 2 people here, especially the Z. I would like to be a gentleman and wait the Z out. I caused the incident anyway, but at the same time, I was gunning for the Sanavi, so sorry about that. I dueled the Calsonic on the brief straights, and after being engaged in a short game of chicken, we arrived on the 7th corner, where my boldness and brakes had won our little game, and claimed my place on the podium. On the straights, I was aiming to slingshot off the Castrol NSX before turn 9. However, I had to see the bigger picture this time around and not overplay my hand. Instead, I aimed to snipe that silver medal off the other NSX on a better opportunity, without dashing any hope I have on catching the Sanavi Skyline. And just like that, P2 was in hand, without risking myself to unnecessary risks. From that point on, I set my sights on speeding up and take on the mighty Sanavi. I spent the entirety of the 2nd lap to catch the red Skyline, and managed to get up close and personal as we entered the 3rd lap. I aimed to make an overtake on the first hairpin, however, dive bombing would prove to be a mistake. I continued to apply pressure on the race leader, and almost had him on the 4th corner as well. This time, I decided to abandon my reckless approach and delayed my attack for another day. On the straights, I thought I could immediately strike after I launched off that corner. However, the Sanavi proved to have enough power to resist my NSX and remain on front. Right before the hairpin, I noticed that an opportunity to attack was there, so I went for it, as this hairpin might be my only chance to both overtake and defend from retaliation at the same time. By the 2nd checkpoint, The tables had been completely turned. The Sanavi skyline was lagging behind, not to mention the rest of the grid. However, there was one point of concern: the tires. They might be on peak condition as of now, but I wasn't even halfway into the race, which means that the second these tires started to leave the green territory, I would be in trouble. I thought that was a problem for future me to handle, so now my concern would be finishing the race in first as soon as possible. On the full lap, the prime racing tires allowed me to go full force around the hairpin. The NSX smoothly made its way around with no hitch, though on the third turn, I might have gone too fast and caused some pain to be traded with the guardrails. After having the car making a little leap, which realistically should have upset the suspension, the first checkpoint was through, and predictably, it showed I was far ahead as I entered the long high-speed section of the layout. On turn 8, I followed the textbook ideal racing line to optimize my lap time and get slightly further away from the Sanavi. I remained consistent throughout turn 9, and as I made my way past the town corner, that weird phantom shift happened again. I wonder if that was they called a ghost in a machine. Anyways, I managed to make my way past the final corner, and I put the metal onto the pedal to end the lap as fast as I could. Looks like the pace I was on was correct, as the gap had increased once again. For the remainder of the race, the gap between me and the skyline had grown larger and larger by each lap. By lap 9, I became wary of my tire condition, as all of them had left the green zone. Fortunately, I was able to end the race before things had gone much worse. That was yet another victory recorded for the books, as well as more points to keep winning within the tournament. Round number 8 was set in the Twin Ring Motegi road course. By the second corner, I was quite concerned by how apart the grid had become, and like usual, it was the Sanavi skyline that managed to escape the traffic early. In between turn 2 and 3, I managed to take on the Hiroto skyline and escape last place. Unfortunately, by the straights leading towards turn 4, I didn't seem to be able to pull myself up to the rest of the grid, and by the 6th corner, the amount of lead the Sanavi skyline had against the rest had honestly became obscene. On my way to turn 7, however, the Galsonic had become unusually slow, giving me ample opportunities to swipe 4th place away from the beautifully blue skyline. I'll be a fool to let such an opportunity go. I tailgated the Z and the other NSX down the 9th corner and didn't overextend my duel against the fellow NSX driver. That was a place on the podium at hand. Now to speed up and capture the fleeting Sanavi skyline, like what I've done before. On the hairpin, I decided to go deep, and while the Castrol cars seemingly managed to reclaim P3, that didn't last long as the corner demanded everyone to slow down. Castrol NSXs were no exception. On the straights, I made an active effort to tailgate the Pitwork Z, as I needed all the speed that I could get. Unfortunately, I reveled in the speed too much, and overshot the 11th corner. Thanks to this horrible mistake, I was thrown back to 5th place. While the Galsonic skyline was easily re-overtaken on the lap's final corner, I would need more effort to recapture the Castrol NSX, the Pitwork Z, and most importantly, the Sanavi skyline, which was 7 seconds ahead. Oh no. By the first corner, I opted to be aggressive and try an overtake against the Castrol NSX, yet the Green Racer proved to be too fast for my street-legal NSX. On the intermission towards the second corner though, the Green Racer was through. To catch up towards the Z, which had started to make some scary improvements, I have to see the bigger picture and absolutely not make the same mistake as I did on turn 11. Ironically, on the second lap's turn 11, I did manage to catch up towards the Z. Time truly is a flat circle. I kept the Red Racer close throughout the final corner and stayed right behind him all the way to lap 3. I grew closer and closer to the point of making a left tap right before the 4th corner. On turn 6, I've gotten even closer and more personal, so I could use the speed the slipstream had helped me gain and make a slingshot maneuver before turn 7. However, the Z was holding quite the grudge. I hammered down on the gas full force throughout the corner and we took 2nd place before this problem had gotten out of control. That was until I found out what I've done was a horrible mistake. In the end, the Z managed to retake 2nd place. I managed to stay close towards the Pitwork Z down the straights, and this time, I used what I could only discern as tire marks on the corner as references to brake properly to handle the 11th corner. We fought over the silver medal again after safely making that turn, as I thought caution was necessary to take on turn 12. I decided to hang back and get another chance to overtake the Z instead. On the 4th lap, I managed to get personal with the Z once more and was side by side to wrestle 2nd place away throughout the 1st corner. I managed to launch off slightly faster than the red race car, and I could finally retake P2 from this fierce opponent. However, the fight was not over just because I made the overtake. Before the 2nd corner hit, I emerged victorious. I kept a tight racing line down these couple of corners for the sake of being optimal and cut down the distance between me and the Sanavi. The high-speed intermission towards the 4th corner helped a bit in loosening the pressure the Z had been putting on me. After I carefully had gone through the corner, I put the pedal to the metal throughout the 5th turn, which helped to escape the pressure the pitward had put on me and my current position. I kept the pace steady as I followed the proper racing line down the next couple of corners and launched off the hairpin as fast as I could. At this point, I was at least 70% done with the race and I was still 4 seconds behind. Things were getting worrying. To avoid overshooting on the 11th corner, I sacrificed some speed in the name of caution. While not the fastest way to do it, this was what I could come up with this under rather pressing circumstances. On the final few corners though, I knew what to do. I managed to put more momentum through and sped past these corners without running as much as a blade of grass. Despite my efforts by the 5th lap, I was still behind by 4 seconds. No matter what I did, I could not get any closer. By the 6th lap, I hoped for a miracle that somehow I could be fast enough to cut down these 4 seconds and get another win for the cup. I tried chaining both turn 2 and 3 together for a faster streamlined approach. It barely cut the distance. By the 8th corner, I could feel the tires were starting to be strained. Even by the final checkpoint, I was still behind by quite the margin. Overshooting turn 11 on the 1st lap, as well as other big mistakes I have made along the way, had made the Sanavi unbeatable. No matter how well I was performing on the latter half of the race, the errors I've made this time were simply too great to be rectified. I had to be happy with 2nd place. There was little option for me other than redeeming myself through winning the last 2 races. Round 9 was set on the Fuji Speedway once again. This time though, it was set on what was in my opinion the hardest variant of the track, the 2005 GT version. The grid start though was something I welcomed wholeheartedly, as this allowed for a fairer match. Before the first turn, I outpowered the Hero automobile, and typical of yours truly, I almost overshot the sharp first turn of the track, which led to a rather nasty incident. While it indirectly brought me to P4, I wasn't exactly proud of what I've done. However, there was no time for self-reflection as I had the son of his skyline to beat. I went past the 100R this time around and the car didn't act out. I swear someone was trying to sabotage me on the 90s Fuji Speedway race. You're saying this, right? I didn't need no unnecessary slowdowns to make it through the 100R safely this time around. After launching off the pin, it was time to work to get the Sanavi. I tailed the car down the 300R and right at the end of the section, I was able to claw my way up to the 1st place. However, do you see these multitudes of roads between us? I was quite confused on which one to take. In the midst of my confusion, the 2 red racers made their way to reclaim their former positions. The Z went too wide, and I filled the gap both the Super GTs unintentionally created. That was P2 retaken, and after a little mishap around the next corner, I took advantage of the Sanavi being a bit disoriented and began squeezing my way through. Our fight continued after the 15th corner was behind us. The skyline went too slow to take on the Panasonic curve and allowed me to finally get my lead to stick. From that point on, the gap between me and the skyline only became far and further. By the 4th lap, as I relied on my experience and instincts to look for the correct braking points down the smartless straights, I was informed that I had practically left the skyline and the rest of the grid in the dust. While I had overshot the 1st corner, I was lucky that there was still asphalt outside of the track's limits. And through this innovative racing line, I managed to hold onto my lead. I used the car's improved power to keep my distance from the rest and go through to the Coca-Cola on high speed, relying on the car's handling to prevent the NSX from spinning out. On the 100R, I employed a bit of throttle control, not out of fear the car will snap oversteer for no reason, but to prevent the NSX from going off track. After I left the hairpin's apex, I gently reintroduced the throttle back to the car and floored it towards the 300R. I refused to slow down, even for a moment down the lean and forgiving corners, which was a good idea as the car remained completely under control throughout the easy turn. This time, on the 10th corner, I felt confused no longer and decisively took to the middle path, guided by experience and an actually functioning memory. With how I was positioned, I couldn't exactly see what was beyond the 13th corner, so I relied on muscle memory, slowed the NSX down and managed to ride on the curves for the optimal racing line down the curve. Unfortunately, I was still too fast on taking on the 15th corner and ended up outside of the track. This layout's most confusing feature turned out to be quite a lifesaver, thanks to the asphalt laid outside of the track's limits. This supposedly fatal error was reduced to a mere inconvenience. Regardless of these hiccups, I hammered down on the long straights, putting the beefed up VTEC to maximum work and scored the personal best for the track. I remained consistently fast throughout the rest of the race, recorded an even more staggering distance on the final lap, and with it, created an undefiable dominance throughout the race. I have to admit, I made some repeated mistakes from time to time. However, they weren't bad enough to the point that the race was unsalvageable. In fact, I managed to end the race much ahead from my opponents, a complete domination and humiliation for the fierce Super GTs. The final round was set on Suzuka circuit. After long 9 rounds, each consisted of at least 10 minutes of death-defying driving, this is it. It was time to put the tournament and this challenge to rest. And from the increased A-spec points, it could only mean they decided to up the ante or the GT oil had expired, turned into regular oil like Cinderella's gown when the clock struck 12 o'clock. I thought little of it and proceeded to finish this tournament. While seemingly undefeated on the straights, the 2 skylines went too wide on the first turn, allowing me to take P4 away in one fell swoop. On turn 4, I used the same tactic to end the Pickwick Z's time on the podium. I thought to reuse this strategy on the next corner. However, that was when I overestimated my NSX, and as a result, the car did the no-no and the castle went away. For now. On the last curve, I decided to immediately try to attack and took him at the entrance of the Dunlop curve. I closed the gap between me and the Sanavi skyline by the nice corner, and on the hairpin, I managed to get up close and personal. Meanwhile, the skyline could not do much as I proved to have enough power to keep up all the way through turn 12. Around the spoon curve, I switched lanes and made a slingshot overtake as we entered the corner. By the second checkpoint, I had managed to leave the skyline behind. This time, as I still had my wits with me, I went past the KCO triangle with the ideal racing line to maintain the lead I've gained over my rivals. The first lap was true, with me 2 seconds ahead of the skyline. The first turn was true. I managed to use all of the track of this corner and made it out as fast as I could. I had no time to rest on my laurels though, and prepared myself to tackle the S-curves. The first curve was through as cleanly as I would have liked. The NSX had a decent amount of grip to go past the second curve as well. On the third curve, I was well aware of the deceptiveness this one could have, and opted for the inner lane for maximum safety. On the Dunlop curve, I was able to maintain a tight lane while going full speed, creating more distance against the Sanavi, which driver at this point should be more than aware on how my street-legal NSX was able to run circles around his Super GT. On the 9th corner, I became gentle with the throttle to maintain as much momentum as possible while keeping my ideal lane throughout the race. The first checkpoint was through, and the gap between me and the skyline increased. I didn't accelerate on the hairpin as well, as through sharp corners like this, patience was truly a virtue. On the spoon curve, I braced myself and got through the rather winding corner with a bit of a gamble. You see, around that corner, I did not let the wheels stop going left and relied completely on throttle control to position my car. I have to admit, driving like that was scary. Optimal, but terrifying. On turn 15, I completely remembered on what to do, and remained within the track's limits as I prepared myself for the last hurdle of the lap, the KCO triangle. I braked in time, pinpointed the apexes of both corners, and went through the chicane accordingly. While the Sanavi was still making heads or tails on the triangle, I've already picked up my speed to finish the second line in record time. I thought things were going swell, which it were, until the spoon curve on lap 4. I overestimated the condition of my tires, which were no longer able to support my gambit-based driving style, and made slight contact with the sand on the right. It was brief, but it was all that it took to throw the NSX off its course. I was lucky I was able to rejoin before the Sanavi skyline took over. However, this had practically erased all advantage that I had. Before the second checkpoint, he managed to retake first place. I, however, still had enough in me to fight back. Like usual, I managed to find a better braking point for the KCO triangle and outplayed the fierce red racer before we made our way throughout the chicane. Swiftly, the fires were put down. However, that incident was a cautionary tale to drive with more caution from now on, even if that meant some loss in speed. On the final lap, I could no longer shake the skyline of my neck as a red racer kept its pressure on me around the S-curve. The tires might have been worn past their prime, but they were still grippy enough to handle full power drive down the Dunlop curve. But not even this was able to leave the skyline in the dust. On the 9th corner, I only could assume that the skyline took a similar lane, and thus was unable to attack. This time, I opted for an aggressive approach down the hairpin, while still being considerate with the car. As much as I would like to relive my past glories, spinning out in a rather temperamental vehicle was not the way to do it. On the spoon curve, I opted for a safer approach this time around. While nowhere as optimal or fast as my performance on the second lap, I figured this was the best I could muster, given my tires were already showing signs of wear and tear. On the 15th corner, I made the slight mistake of turning a bit early, causing some loss in speed and giving the already looming Sanavi mobile to attack. But before us was the Casio Triangle. This was it, all or nothing. I braked late, frying the NSX had enough braking force in it to slow down before all was too late. The final victory was at hand. At that point, only speed and power mattered. Which will emerge as the winner? Will it be the street legal, heavily upgraded NSX? Or will the Sanavi Skyline show one last burst of speed to save the Super GT legacy? And the winner was the new Sports Car Experimental! While this was no World Championship, the amount of races, the venues picked for each round, and the fact that the regular contestants in this race would use a race car, I could say that the All Japan GT Championship is indeed the mini Gran Turismo World Championship, and I beat a tournament such as that in nothing more than road legal blue NSXR. If that was no hallmark of a brilliant sports car, then I don't know what is. Truly, this NSX is a masterpiece! And that's it. Gran Turismo 4 ran with only Honda NSXs. In the beginners events, you get 2 events. Meanwhile, in the professional league, you get 3. Thanks to the NSXR, taking part in the Type R meeting becomes possible. For the Japanese events, you can join 3 of them, and not to mention all of special condition events. The hardest part of this journey was the Grand Canyon Rally on hard. You're up against purebred rally cars, while all you got was a street-bred NSX. Even with Tikanji's tune, rallying in these beautiful cars are still unfortunately painful. In the end, racing exclusively in NSXs allows you to complete at least 20% of the game. That's a fifth of the entirety of Gran Turismo 4 in a car dubbed new Sports Car Experimental.